صباح الخير جميعا. هل ممكن توصلني؟
Good morning, everyone. Do you hear me well?
Yes. سامعينك يا.
My paper or my intervention is out of a realistic experience about the self or internal dialogue within a group of political entities to address the issue of polarization, especially in the transitional periods which happened in Egypt after 2011, and the project maybe started basically after 2013. Between 2013 and 2017. And it went through several points or several phases that I'm going to explain in 5 points. The context which this process took place and the main question, which is why to have self-criticism, and the third point had to do with the purposes and objectives of this process that took place. And the fourth period is about the process itself, how these processes and activities were made, and then the challenges and the main obstacles that face anyone who works in this issue and how to deal with these issues. The first one, which has to do with the context in transition, and my colleagues, Mr. Affan and Said Aid, mentioned some of the what we can call the polarizations that happen in transition, because we're talking about different polarizations, including before 2013, between 2013 and after 2013, we had a different polarization. There was polarization about secular and Islamic identity policy of the historical policy of the institutions, whether to organize the system in the demonstration, the protest, or within the institutions, and there are polarizations that have to do between, or have to do with the new generations or the old generations. So polarizations were there between the reformists and the revolutionists. These polarization characterized the transitional period. After 2013, we started to see other polarization about the use of the political violence and non-use of political violence after what happened in 2013. So the context of the different polarizations that were overlapping on different levels, and they were also promoted in the media in different ways and in different shapes, which have a different reality. For example, the polarization that happened in Egypt, for example, in March 2011, it was shown that it is a polarization of identity, although we were talking about, although the point of amending the Article 2 of the Constitution about the Sharia as the source of legislation wasn't the purpose at all. So we were talking about different political contexts. The project started after 2013 because we were facing a case of an extreme case of polarization, and a lot of political parties were unable to sit down together at one table. And our main entry point to address this issue were the concerns that are prevailing in these periods that call for the self-critique in order to allow for trust building. And this process might prevent, and I hope, and I think that in the cases that were presented by Saif and Dr. Affan, also prevent from the falling into the radicalization or the use of violence, because it allows us to see the mistakes or how we dealt with the issues in the context of transition. Then, about how to deal with these issues in the political transition. All the political parties, whether the Al-Wafd or the Muslim Brotherhoods or other political parties, or the new emerging parties, after 2011, we started, they are all were functioning in a new context, and there were new questions that need to be answered, because what characterized the Mubarak period was that the different political forces didn't imagine that they will have to answer to the questions that have to do with governance, and they were only in the opposition or the protest. So getting into the realm of the governance and as the constitution that they have to draft and public policies that they need to deal with, or the system of the country that they need to take into consideration, all of these questions were happening in a new context, and they require a different way of dealing with these issues that these forces were not ready to do. The next point is related to seeing new forces or new movements that emerged in the landscape, new initiatives that were established within political entities that started to take shape in different political entities like the Discourse or the Constitution Party or the Popular Movement Party. So we started to see new political forces, and this is also something that appears in transition. And the purpose of the internal dialogue we wanted to do through the self-criticism mechanism, and while we were doing that, we had a number of main goals. The first one is how can we support the democratic transition, because in a polarized environment within transition, the experience in Egypt and in other countries, it shows that the environment in this polarized, or in such a polarized environment, getting the minimum level of consensus is very important for the success of democratic transition, especially that the democratic transition after 2013 or 2015, we started to see that the democratic transition is facing challenges which require to revisit the points or the facts of solidifying the political forces. And then we need to have an internal dialogue, because the lack of democratic mechanisms within the entity, or to have self-critique, all of these parts of the democratic culture that should be spread within the entity in order to be able to participate in the democratic transition. The third point and the final point is related about the relation between this entity and other entities, because in such polarizations and different concerns and fears from each other, because of the lack of clarity and all of that increase these fears and concerns, and this prevents us from building trust between the different entities. So building the trust or having trusted measures is very important for the success of the democratic transition. The fourth one is about the activities. One of the most difficult things, the willingness of the different parties to sit down together, not to mention how to deal with the developments, was something very difficult. Of course, this activity was taking place on four main steps. The first one was to have a steering committee composed of entry points, which means different people or diverse people who can be close to these entities, but at the same time, they are not affiliated or they don't represent those entities, and they can facilitate having a dialogue or internal dialogue. At the same time, it helps to get the political parties that are related to in such a dialogue. So this was the first phase. And those people were participants, not only a steering committee, they participated in the design of the process, monitoring it and solving, monitoring and evaluation and solving the problems. The second phase was the dialogue within the political entity itself, whether it is a group or a political party or a social movement. In in this point, it was very important to give the groups doing that the sense of ownership. This is not a place to elaborate on this, but the most important points of that is how that there will be a researcher that will be trained on mapping the issues and key points or questions, because sometimes these issues were not present or available. So one of the researchers from within the group will do that mapping in order to facilitate or manage the process. And the internal management of the process was very important, which means that we have a group from within the entities that are trained on this facilitation in order to deal with these issues. So the preparation for the dialogue is very important in order to maintain support for the process and continuation of the process to a large extent. The third phase, those groups, for example, we have liberal entities or leftist groups to speak with each other alone, or the liberals speak with each other, or the Muslim groups or the secular groups speak with each other. So we started the dialogue with groups that are similar to each other or who have commonalities in order to get involved in such a dialogue. The fourth phase, and it doesn't mean that they are consecutive phases. Sometimes they overlap or they happen in parallel at the same time. The fourth phase was the lessons or the emergence of the groups that have overlapping issues with each other in order to discuss common grounds or shared points with each other. For example, the organizational structure of them, the diversity within these groups, developing policies to deal with the public affairs. So there was a number of political entities that suffer from the same problems. So that allowed to have to conduct a dialogue on these issues. Some of the important responses that happened during this process was that some entities issued statements of self-critique, and I believe that was very important to create a case that puts away any lack of trust or lack of confidence between the different parties. Now, the idea of self-lashing, how can we address that issue? Because this is one of the dangerous things that, especially that we're talking about, is we have new emerging entities, and some of these entities were prone to be divided in a way or another, as Mr. Afan mentioned. The identity was not very clear. There was a kind of liquidity in their identity. So we wanted to build what we can call a future-oriented approach that can be present in the dialogue between the different parties. So we understand the problem in the framework of the past, but we have a future-oriented approach to deal with the same issue. One of the key issues as well was the concerns of some parties, especially after 2013, from the pressure placed or imposed by the political regime and security pressure, which puts the threat that this issue will be leaked outside the entity and it will be used against these groups, and that was one of the main challenges. And that's why it was very important to give the ownership of this process to those entities and to provide the protection for them from leaking such processes to the media, not to be used against them. The other point is the inclusiveness, whether inclusivity internally speaking, which means how the different parties and the different trends within the entity can be represented, and the inclusiveness of the different entities and parties externally. this was our role as monitoring to see the representation and how it is taken in place, whether for the different generations, the different organizational structures, or components in these bodies. That was a very difficult point. And there was, and we managed to have that inclusivity in the different entities. In the first place, we said that we need to have this inclusivity within one body, and then to have inclusivity with, amongst other entities. I'm about to finish now. We had also one problem, which was the difference of the political context. In different transitional periods, we can talk about some kind of stability. For example, between 2011 to 2012, it was a different way. From 2012 to 2013, it was a completely different phase, and from 2013 to 2015, it was a different phase. So we are talking about different contexts, and this provides complexities in the process, because we have different factors that factor in this process, and the security pressure started to increase after 2013, and there were factors that were putting pressure on all the parties. In brief, in this process, we used self-criticism to address the issue of polarization, and I believe that if improved, this can deal with the violent radicalization, and it can be improved to wider spaces, because part of this challenge is addressing the internal or self-roots, deep roots of the transition or the use of violence. And usually there is more focus on external factors rather than internal factors. And there were long periods of tyranny that led to this tendency. So I believe addressing the internal factors becomes more important. That is similar or even more important than addressing the external factors. Thank you very much indeed.